Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever Die Hard MMA podcast. I am your host, Clint McLean. I'm excited to welcome you all into the podcast. I'm really excited for some of the things that we're going to do here. I think this is a great time for UFC and MMA, and I just want to, give you all an idea of what we're going to try and do here. So there are a lot of UFC MMA podcasts out there. There's a lot of gambling, betting, and breakdown type of podcasts out there. We're going to try and make something that's a little bit of a hybrid. The idea is we're going to hang out, we're going to get to know each other. This is going to be more entertaining, and of course there's going to be an aspect of betting and gambling and things like that involved. So what we're going to do is break down some of the basic level things. I know a lot of the listeners are going to be new to the UFC. They're going to be new to MMA in general. They might also not have any experience as far as gambling or betting is concerned, and we're going to have to explain some things like that. So don't worry, for you diehards, for you hardcores, we're still going to have a whole lot of fun here. We're still going to break down the fights and get into things like that. But we are going to have to take it slow at the beginning for those that are new to this kind of thing. So first and foremost, let's start with the introductions. Like I said, my name is Clint McLean. I am a diehard UFC and MMA fan. I've been an MMA fan for years. I've actually done a decent bit of training. I am a blue belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Scott Tenenbaum, TNT MMA in Phoenix, Arizona. I've done a decent amount of Muay Thai. I trained at Power MMA and Fitness. For those of you who don't know, that's the gym that Ryan Bader and CB Dollaway started here in Phoenix, Arizona. I've done grappling competitions such as Naga and been a UFC fan for a very long time. I want to say the first UFC fight that I can actually remember going back to is Forrest Griffin versus Rampage Jackson. I was so hooked on The Ultimate Fighter that season. Watched it all the way through, and then the culmination of watching those two men just go at it. And, everyday kind of guy like Forrest Griffin taking the title from a guy like Rampage Jackson that was just a legend in the sport at that time. That was absolutely amazing, and that's really what set me off as a fan for the UFC. Since that fight, I've almost not missed a single pay-per-view event. I've paid for basically every single UFC ever since, and I've followed the sport very, very closely. Some of you are going to know me from YouTube. I'm in the comments on there as Animarak. I joined the SBR breakdowns, YouTube live chat and stuff like that. That's my username on there. I'm actually a writer, a UFC writer for SBR. I do breakdowns and I give picks for them, and every once in a while I jump on the live streams there as well. They don't have a guy really that does UFC or MMA all that much, and I've kind of slotted into that role. It's a fun little thing, and that's really kind of what got me started here, thinking maybe I should do a podcast of my own. This podcast is going to be very, very fluid. It's going to be something that kind of grows and evolves as we get to know each other and move forward with this whole thing. But I would like to do something. I've got a decent amount of gambling stories. I'm a poker player. I've done jiu-jitsu, grappling, and a decent bit of training, and I am a longtime UFC fan. So that's something that, as the podcast goes, I'd like to give you guys a little bit of a tidbit of information as to who I am, where I came from, and really just get to know each other. The last piece of the puzzle really is that I'm a degenerate gambler. I do like my sports betting. I do like playing poker, and I've always been that way. That's always been kind of something that I've been into. If there's a chance for me to push the limit, if there's a chance for me to get into something that maybe I shouldn't, I'm that guy that's going to take a swing at it and try it at least once. I had a gambler's mindset from playing poker in Vegas for a crazy weekend and thought, you know what? There are some live fights going. Why am I not putting money on these? And that was it. We were off to the races. Ever since then, basically all I can do when it comes to MMA is think of everything from a betting perspective. I like to look at the odds. I like to look at all the sportsbook out there and see, what they're offering, who's the underdog, who's the favorite, is there any cool prop you can get a better line on them by knockout. And I always just really dig deep into that. That's kind of what drives me these days, is I have a real good time just analyzing it from the perspective of trying to make money off of the fight. Since it's a sport that I love so much and follow so closely, it just seems like the next natural progression to try and do something where you can actually make some money on it, even if it's not, a whole lot, even if you're just in Vegas for a short weekend having a good time, $50, $100, something like that. It doesn't matter. Having just a little bit of money on fights makes them just that much more entertaining. And I'm not so bad at it. Just since 2019 has gotten started, UFC Brooklyn, I went 4-2 on my picks for plus 2.2 units. And for the Bellator Heavyweight Grand Prix, I went 3-1 on my picks for plus 4.25 units. UFC Fortaleza Brazil, I went 5-2 on my picks for plus 6.58 units, bringing 2019's total to 12-5 for plus 13.03 units. Now, I know that's a real short sample size. Those of you that are gamblers, those numbers aren't really super impressive because it's just over a couple of events. But that's a great start. That's just a fantastic start to 2019. 12-5 is not easy to do. For those of you who don't understand what I mean when I say a unit, when it comes to sports betting, most professional gamblers do use a unit size. Essentially, it's 1% of your entire gambling budget or your bankroll. For the purposes of this podcast and the picks that I give on SBR and things like that, a unit is going to be calculated as $100. So if you're making a bet on something, that's a 1 unit bet. You're putting $100 on that bet. That's what that's going to mean. So going forward, bear that in mind. Before we get into breaking down the card, the other thing that we have to explain is exactly how betting lines work. So for instance, we're just going to throw a number out there. If you've got a favorite who's a minus 200 favorite and the underdog is plus 150, those of you who don't bet aren't going to know what that means. This is why using the unit size of $100 makes a lot of sense. It just makes the whole process that much easier. A favorite that is listed at minus 200 means that you're going to have to lay $200 to win $100. That's what that minus means. So if the favorite is minus 150, you have to pay $150, and if your bet wins, you win $100 back. So if the favorite is minus 200, you're paying $200. If he wins, you're winning $100 back. The bigger the favorite, the more money you have to put down just to get your $100 back. The reverse side of this is the underdogs. They have the plus next to their name. So if a plus 150 underdog is your bet, you're placing $100 on him, and you win $150 if he should win. The larger the underdog, the less chance they have of winning, but the more money you stand on making. So a plus 350 underdog means a $100 bet will win you $350. And that's why in MMA, underdogs are so popular. They're just so easy to bet. You're locking two human beings inside of a cage, and crazy things happen. Underdogs in MMA are my absolute favorite thing in the world to bet on. Other sports, there's analytics, there's numbers, there are things supporting why a certain team should not beat a certain team. And yes, upsets do still happen, but not like in MMA where a single punch, a single slip, a single mistake can mean the difference, and your underdog can come on through on any given night. This can happen, and it happens all the time. Without further ado, let's get into UFC 234. It is highlighted by Robert Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. That's just an absolutely amazing fight. But as that's the main event, I want to go ahead and leave that for the end. I'd like to start at the bottom of the card, and the way I'm going to do the podcast is we're just going to go over notable fights that I think there's going to be some interest in. We'll talk about some storylines. We'll talk about maybe some fighters to keep an eye out, simple breakdowns, and especially breakdowns if I have a pick on a fight. But I don't want the podcast to just drag on and go over every single fight, every single fighter, every single angle and what they're good at and what they're not. Like I said, I want this show to be entertaining. I want it to be fun. And if you don't care about a fight, or if I don't have a pick on a fight for you, what are you listening for? You know, I feel like a lot of shows that are providing a lot of really good information do that, where they break down every single fight inside and out. And then you get to the very end of it and you're waiting and you go, what am I going to put my money on? How do I win on this fight? And they go, you know what? It's too close to pick. It's a pass. I don't really want to do that to you guys. I mean, it's entertaining for the purpose of breaking down a fight if you're going to use that fighter in, you know, maybe a later circumstance. If they come up in a fight down the road, you have all that information logged away in the back of your brain. But right now, you don't need it. So let's go ahead and get started on the preliminary card here. The first fight that I really like or have any kind of opinion on is going to be Devante Smith versus Dong-Hyun Ma. Dong-Hyun Ma is actually Dong-Hyun Kim, but he changed his last name from Kim to Ma because there's another Dong-Hyun Kim, and the two of them were getting confused. People were mixing them up all the time, so I think it's actually smart branding for him to have a slightly different name. Devante Smith is a absolutely impressive young fighter. He's 25 years old. This fight is going to be at 155 pounds. For those of you who don't follow UFC or MMA yet, we're going to turn you into diehard fans. That's lightweight. So he's a lightweight fighter, and he's an impressive 9-1 with his one win coming by TKO against John Gunther, who's another UFC fighter who actually just got into the UFC, and He's not overly impressive, to be completely honest, but that was back in 2017, and that was just the 5th pro fight for young Devante Smith. Since then, he's put together a 5-fight win streak, and he's finished every single one of those fights, 4 of those by KO. As of right now, Devante Smith is sitting at a nice minus 235. So that means if we put down $235 and he wins this fight, we will win back $100 in addition to the $235 that we bet. It looks like 96% of the money has come against him on Dong-Hyun Ma. He's coming off an impressive KO of Julian Rosa at UFC Fight Night 139. And I think he's the rightful favorite. I mean, if you look at this, this is a very interesting betting situation where the line opened at minus 235. So he was a big favorite right from the start. Like I said, 96% of the money has come in on Dong-Hyun Ma. However, Devante Smith has become even more of a favorite. And that's very interesting because that means that 4% of the money that's come in on Devante Smith, that means more to the books than the money that's come in on Dong-Hyun Ma. So they either trust the person who bet that money on Devante Smith more than they trust everybody else that's betting on the other guy, or that 4% is just a significant amount of money. It's maybe a single large bet that they pay attention to. Either way, this is what they call reverse line movement. Anytime you get a sports betting circumstance where all the money is just landsliding in on one side, like last year, think football, what happened with the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Everybody and their mother was betting on the Eagles. They were a huge underdog when it opened, but when they closed, it was down to almost a pick 'em, and that was just because the sheer amount of money that came in. That's what happens. The more you bet on an underdog, the less of an underdog they become as far as the betting line is concerned. This is the opposite situation. Dong-Hyun Ma is more of an underdog, and 96% of the money has come in on him. That just doesn't make sense. What that tells me is somebody out there knows something that we don't know. I think Devante Smith, out of the two of these fighters, is more of the finisher. He has 8 wins by TKO and 1 win by submission. So all 9 of his wins have been finishes. So he has yet to see the judges' scorecards. He's finished every single fight one way or the other. This will only be his 2nd UFC fight. However, I do think he's going to be the fighter that's got a little more explosion. He's got a little more pop to him. He's the younger fighter of the two, and truth be told, I think he's got the higher ceiling. What I mean by he's got a higher ceiling means his potential. He's got a whole lot more room to grow. I think we've kind of seen the best of Dong-Hyun Ma. He's 30 years old. He's been in the UFC for some time now. He's got a decent record in the UFC. I mean, it's 3-2, so it's not great, but he hasn't really been fighting the best guys. So his last one was Damian Brown. The one before that was Takanori Gomi. He knocked out Takanori Gomi in the first round, and Gomi has been done for a long time. For any of those of you who follow the sport and know who Gomi is, you know what I'm talking about. Basically, anybody knocks him out at this point. He is done, he is baked, he is cooked. So I think Devante Smith is the rightful favorite, and honestly, I think he's worth a bet. Right now at 5 dimes, you can get Smith winning inside the distance at minus 131. And what that means, again, for those of you who are new to sports betting and MMA, is you've got this guy who's a favorite. He's a massive favorite, like we talked about just a couple minutes ago. He is a absolutely gigantic minus 235 favorite or minus 240 favorite, depending on where you can get him. And that's just too much. I don't like to lay that much money to win a little amount of money. But you can turn that minus 240 favorite into a minus 131 favorite, which is much, much closer to getting even money from the sports books. As long as he wins before that final bell rings, that's where this stuff gets dicey. So we're going to get a much better line, but he has to finish the fight. If he just wins, we lose our bet. So we're going to take Devante Smith inside the distance. We're going to keep his streak of finishing his opponents rolling. And the reason we want to do inside the distance rather than KO or submission is that it's just not that big of a price difference between KO and inside the distance. So if he happens to rock Dong-Hyun Ma and then somehow slaps some kind of a choke on him, we lose our bet if we take him by KO. So we're going to take him inside the distance at minus 131 as an official pick. Ladies and gentlemen, what that means is our very first pick of the podcast is Devante Smith wins inside the distance at minus 131. I'm excited and nervous because that's not one of my top tier confidence picks. I think there's some value on it. I think that it's a solid pick. I'm glad that we're making it, but I'm a little nervous about it being the first pick of the show because, man, if it loses, you can't start the show off on a losing note like that. That's just not cool. It's actually kind of hilarious. Whenever I do picks and I give them out on Twitter and stuff like that, whenever I lose my very first pick of the night, I seem to go on a landslide run. The rest of the card, I win like 90% of my picks if I lose that first pick. And it's so funny because it seems like the reverse happens. If I win the very first pick of the night, it seems like I'm in for a bad night. I'm hoping that's just bad luck because you're so confident. You feel so good after your very first pick comes through. But I've just been scared. I've just been nervous because every single time my first pick comes through, I get crushed the whole rest of the night. So let's cross our fingers that doesn't happen here. That's actually the only pick that we're going to have for the undercard on this particular fight night. So we're going to move on to the main card, and that kicks off with Jim Croute versus Sam Alvey at light heavyweight. Jim Croute is a super impressive 9-0. He's undefeated, and this will be his second outing for the UFC. He made his UFC debut against Paul the Bear Jew Craig. Yes, you heard that right. That man's fight name is the Bear Jew. And he actually finished that fight by submission in round 3 via Kimura. It was a relatively entertaining fight, I'll be honest. I actually wanted to fade Jim Croute in his first fight in the UFC. He came off of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contenders, and he TKO'd his opponent in the first round, but I honestly thought it was an early stoppage. The referee stepped in, he waved it off, and the guy was fine. Like he was getting hit, but he wasn't out. He wasn't rocked. I think maybe the referee just didn't think he was intelligently defending himself. But in my opinion of that fight, the guy didn't look like he was in any trouble. He was taking shots, but he wasn't in trouble. He wasn't about to go down. He wasn't hurt. I would have let it go a little further personally. So I didn't think that Jim Croute was worthy of his slot on the UFC at that time. However, he stepped in and he took care of business against Paul Craig, who's a really tough opponent. Now he's going to get paired up with Smilin' Sam Alvey, who is one of the most fun fighters you guys will ever see. If you're like my mom, and the only time you talk MMA with me is when Paige Van Zandt fights, because you saw her on Dancing with the Stars, Sam Alvey is your kind of guy. His nickname, Smilin' Sam Alvey, is perfect for him. He's got a big, goofy, cheesy grin on his face 24/7. He's just a great guy. And he's got a record of 33-11. He's got some crazy knockout power, actually. 19 KOs on his record, 11 decisions and 3 submissions. So 58% knockout rate. That's how he wins most of his fights. But truth be told, he's just not overly impressive. He's slow, he's plodding, and against low-tier fighters, guys who are not UFC caliber, he finds that big shot. He will sneak a big old punch in and disconnect the lights. I just don't see that happening against Jim Croute. Croute is surprisingly underrated. In just one fight, he's completely managed to turn my opinion of him around. He's only got 9 wins. He's 3-3-3, 3 KOs, 3 submissions, 3 decisions. His submission game is solid. I want to say he's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Very impressive, decently high level, especially for a bigger guy. Honestly, I just see him out-voluming Sam Alvey. Jim Croute is like Sam Alvey 2.0. Basically, he's a younger version of Sam Alvey. He's a better version of Sam Alvey. He's got a little bit more production on the feet. He's got a better ground game. He's a smarter fighter. Sam Alvey wants to go in there. He wants to throw hands. He wants to put on a good show. Jim Croute is mean and he's coming to win. Believe it or not, because both these guys put themselves in the line of fire, and I think Jim Croute is the more well-rounded of the two, I think he's going to finish Sam Alvey. I know that's not a popular opinion, but I really think he's going to. And that's where this thing starts to get interesting. The betting line for Jim Croute and Sam Alvey right now has Jim Croute as just a slight favorite. The line opened with Jim Croute being a -145 favorite and Sam Alvey being a +125 underdog. That line has since shrunk just a little bit. It looks like at Pinnacle, you can get Jim Croute at -127. Most of the other books still have him lined at -140, so some pretty decent money at Pinnacle must have come in on Sam Alvey to close that line a little bit at that particular book. And I think that's about accurate. I think Sam Alvey should be a slight underdog in this kind of a circumstance. His last fight, he fought Antonio Rogerio Nogueira, who's one of the legendary Nogueira brothers. And while he's an incredible fighter, he's a dinosaur. That's not the kind of fighter that anybody who's a modern UFC caliber guy should be losing to. And Alvey got picked apart by Nogueira and then KO'd stiff in the second round. He is just not looking like the Sam Alvey that he used to be. I'm not seeing any signs of progression or anything like that in him, and Jim Croute is the exact opposite. He's getting better every single fight. So what I'm going to do is go official on Jim Croute. And like I said, we can get that line at Pinnacle, minus 127. We're going to make an official play, Jim Croute, minus 127. What we're also going to do is get a little crazy. We're going to take Jim Croute inside the distance at plus 356. That's an insane amount of value. This kid has a solid ground game, and I don't see him taking Sam Alvey down. But if he clips him and he rocks him, he could easily submit him. Both these guys are looking for the knockout. You're telling me they're going to go 3 full 5-minute rounds without one of them hitting the canvas or getting rocked? They both got the kind of power that when they connect and they rock a guy, they will finish them. The difference is Sam Alvey has no killer instinct. He rocks his opponents and then he backs off and he tends to let them recover and get them back in the fight. He has to get a clean knockout to win the fight. Jim Croute, on the other hand, is young and mean. He's going to clip somebody, and when he gets them hurt, he will go for the kill. He swarms. I just think this line is absolutely insane at plus 356. That is a crap ton of value. So we're going to double up. We're going to take him straight because there is a chance that he wins this thing by decision. We're also going to take him inside the distance because we can get 3.5 to 1 on our 1-unit bet if he should get it done inside the distance. The next fight on the card is Montana De La Rosa versus Nadia Kassim. And I really hate to gloss over this fight because I actually really love women's MMA. It's improving. You've got a bunch of young up-and-comer girls that are just vicious. They come for blood, and sometimes they're the more entertaining fights. And I don't like not having a pick on this fight and not breaking it down, but unfortunately I don't see anything. I don't lean one way or the other. So we are going to skip over that fight. Next up at bantamweight, we've got Ronnie Yahya facing Ricky Simone. Ronnie Yahya is 26-9 and is a jiu-jitsu specialist, fighting the young Ricky Simone, who is only 14-1. This is a really, really interesting fight because it's kind of a stepping ladder type of fight. We're going to find out if Ricky Simone belongs on the short list of contenders if he can take out Ronnie Yahya. Ronnie Yahya has been looking super, super impressive lately, and he's been on a really decent run in the UFC. You would like him to see some higher caliber competition before you could say he's a true contender, but you can only take what the UFC puts in front of you. Ronnie is 26-9 with 20 of his wins coming by submission. That's an insane 77% of his wins coming via submission. Fun story. He follows me on Instagram. That's right. UFC fighter Ronnie Yahya follows me on Instagram. He's facing Ricky Simon, which, like I said, is 14-1. He's only 26 years old. Really, really impressive kid. He's got 5 TKO victories, 2 submissions himself, and 7 decisions. But his one loss that he does have did come by submission, which is very interesting because going up against a guy like Ronnie Yahya who has 20 submission victories, this is going to be a sink or swim type of fight. Ricky Simon has an advantage on the feet. He's going to be the better striker of the two. He's also the younger of the two, so he's probably going to be a little bit more aggressive. He is a wrestler. He likes to really pin his opponents down on their back and put that pressure on them. However, you don't want to get on top of a guy like Ronnie Yahya, who's got a really active guard and can get submissions from his back. So you've got this wrestler who generally wants to get on top of people and take you down. However, you're fighting an opponent who you really don't want to take down. So what that means is they might end up standing, or the tables may turn and Ronnie might actually be the one going for the takedown. I think the way this pans out is Ricky either wins by decision because he keeps it on the feet, he uses his wrestling in reverse and makes Ronnie Yahya stand with him and just kind of pieces him apart on the feet for 3 rounds, or Ronnie gets the takedown and gets on top of Ricky, and when a wrestler's on their back, they generally do not know what to do with that, and Ronnie tacks on submission number 21 to his record. The line is really even. It opened up at Ricky Simon being a real close minus 130 favorite. However, it shortened just a little bit. 47% of the money has come in on Ricky, while 53% has come on Ronnie as a dog, basically closing this line to a pick'em. You can get Ricky as a minus 113 favorite on Pinnacle, and Ronnie Yahya is just a plus 101 favorite, so essentially the closest thing to even money that you can get at Pinnacle. So basically, my strategy for this fight is it's a coin toss. One of these guys can win by decision, the other one can finish and maybe squeak out a decision, but that's highly unlikely against a younger, stronger wrestler. So it's either Ricky by decision or Ronnie by submission. And you can get a prop on 5 dimes. You can get Yahya wins by submission at plus 219. So when you're flipping a coin and it's 50-50, why wouldn't you want to take the extra juice? I'm going to go ahead and take Ronnie Yahya wins by submission because instead of taking him at even money to just win the fight, we can take him at plus 219 and make some free money if he gets that submission win. I don't see Ronnie winning on the scorecards, but I do think he has a legitimate chance to win the fight. So we're going to go ahead and take Ronnie Yahya by submission plus 219. And now for the co-main event of the evening, we have Israel Adesanya, the last style bender, facing Anderson the Spider Silva. This is a fantastic fight. This is a changing of the guards kind of fight. 10 years ago, Anderson Silva was the pinnacle of everything we all wanted to be and watch and see from mixed martial arts. He was on an incredible undefeated streak. He wrecked everybody and just made them look like they didn't belong in the cage with them. Israel Adesanya is doing that now, and he's only 29 years old. Anderson Silva has suffered some defeats. He lost his belt. Things are not going great for him recently. He lost a couple of decisions to guys like Michael Bisping, Daniel Cormier. That was a little more one-sided due to the wrestling advantage. But he's by no means done. He still shows that he is dangerous. He's a threat. A guy like Daniel Cormier, who's the current heavyweight champion of the world, took him down to avoid striking with him. So he's still no slouch. However, he is kind of a stepping stone in the division. And Israel Adesanya is a guy who looks like a younger version of Anderson Silva. He's the kind of guy who's doing the same things to his opponents that Anderson Silva used to do, just making them look silly, like they don't belong in the cage with him. At 15-0, he's absolutely impressive, and I gotta say, he's got one of the coolest nicknames in the game. The Last Stylebender, I'm a hardcore nerd. For those of you who didn't watch Avatar: The Last Airbender, you don't know what you're missing out on. It was awesome, but basically the idea behind it is that you've got the different elements, earth, water, fire, air, and the Avatar is the one human being born with the ability to cover all 4 of those elements. So compared to everybody else around him, he's just insanely powerful. Well, what Israel Adesanya is saying with that nickname about himself is that he's the person who can combine all the different styles. He's saying boxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, jiu-jitsu. He's going to do it all and have access to all of it at a greater level than all of his opponents. A lot of people hear that name and they don't understand the reference that he's trying to make there, and it reeks of confidence. This kid is legit, and he is probably our next champion at 185 pounds. Anderson Silva, he's got 34 wins and 8 losses, 22 KO victories for a 65% finish rate. It's a little higher than that, actually, because he does have 4 submission victories as well for 12% to tack on top of that. But in his last 6 fights, he has 1 win. He lost to Chris Wyman back in 2013 when Chris KO'd him stiff. And then at the end of 2013, when they had the rematch, is when we had that horrific leg break where he snapped it. He had his fight with Nick Diaz in 2015. That fight was overturned. I believe that was due to the PEDs issue, performance-enhancing drugs. He got busted for something, and that fight was ruled as a no contest. He then fought Michael Bisping in 2016, where it looked like he was going to KO Bisping in the first round, and Bisping, being just the warrior that he is, gutted it out and fought back and won a decision, a very close, controversial split decision over Anderson Silva. And then the fight with Daniel Cormier happened. Just recently, he fought against Derek Brunson, who's another younger up-and-comer type of fighter in 2017, and he won a unanimous 3-round decision victory. The fact remains, this is the kind of fight that Israel Adesanya is basically being served up a legend for his resume. The UFC is saying, here's Anderson Silva. He's in the co-main event. He's got some name value, so people are going to tune in to watch him because it is the Spider. We love him. We miss him. We watched him for all of those years. And this is the new Anderson Silva. Here's Israel Adesanya. And we're going to feed the old lion to the young lion is what the UFC is doing in this fight. And that's reflected in the betting odds. Israel Adesanya opened as a massive 610 favorite. So if you bet $610 and he wins, you'll get your one back. And in my opinion, he's one of the closest things to a lock in MMA that we have ever seen. I'm not in the game of laying $610 to win $100. That's just not the way I play MMA. The way I think we find value on this is, once again, looking for a massive favorite to get the fight done inside the distance. You shrink the lines down from being these insanely over-bloated lines by taking the risk of having these massive favorites get the job done. And with guys like Adesanya, I think that's a safe bet. He does not show any respect. The kid's a killer. He wants to go in there and prove that he's the best fighter that we've ever seen, and he does it violently and viciously. He comes at you from angles that you have never seen. He has got some very, very fast twitch response type of strikes, which is what Anderson Silva used to do. Anderson has slowed down just a touch. When you've got two guys that are mirrors of each other and one is just a little bit faster in the fight game, speed kills. So we're going to take Israel Adesanya minus 132. We're taking a minus 600 favorite and we're getting minus 132 on him just to say that he's going to get it done inside the distance. If he wins on the scorecards, if he gets a 3-round decision victory just for beating up Anderson Silva, that's fine. I won't even be bothered at it. We're getting the best line possible by taking him inside the distance here. Adesanya wins minus 132. Book it. And that brings us to the main event of the evening. Robert the Reaper Whittaker versus Kelvin Gastelum. I'm just nerding out over this fight. As a longtime UFC fan, I've seen both of these guys come up through the Ultimate Fighter, have their moments in the spotlight, earn their title shots. One of them is a champion, and now the other one is challenging for that belt. It's just absolute madness, and that's the beauty of shows like The Ultimate Fighter. It's not as entertaining as it used to be, I'll admit, but that's how I got into the sport. I got hooked on The Ultimate Fighter. I got invested in guys like Ryan Bader and Kelvin Gastelum, and you watch them and their careers, and they grow and they evolve, and then they get to this peak moment in their career, and you're so invested. I love it. And not only that, but this is just an amazing matchup. So Robert Whittaker was a former 170-pound fighter, and he ran into a little bit of a tough spot. He lost a split decision to Court McGee, and then he got TKO'd by Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. And a lot of the belief of that was basically he was cutting himself dry trying to make that 170-pound limit. He was cutting too much weight. It was hurting him and hurting his effort. So then he bounces back. He moves up to 185. That extra body weight, that extra muscle. He was healthier, and he fought Mike Rhodes, won a decision, started getting on track, KOs Clint Hester, KOs Brad Tavares, beats Uriah Hall, beats Rafael Natal, KOs Derek Brunson, KOs Jacare Souza, which is a big deal. He's another perennial title challenger. And then it has 2 back-to-back wars with Yoel Romero, who is the longtime number 2 of this division. Now, those fights were a little bit controversial. Some people think Yoel Romero won the rematch, myself included. But the fact remains that those fights were absolutely amazing. And Robert Whittaker is currently riding a 9-fight win streak and is the undisputed champion of the UFC's middleweight division. Kelvin Gastelum has a very similar path. He actually ran into rough roads at 170 pounds as well. He lost to current 170-pound champion Tyrone Woodley in a very close split decision that a lot of people think that he won. Then he started having weight issues. He bumped up to 185. So Kelvin Gastelum has also found success at 185 pounds. Kelvin's record is 15-3. Robert's is 20-4. Both of these guys have a high finish rate, and we owe the UFC a massive debt of gratitude for giving us this fight. Neither of these guys look for the takedown. Both of them absolutely can wrestle, but most of the time it's their opponents that are looking for the takedown. They're going to stand in front of each other and bang. The first person that shoots for a takedown is probably in trouble. Robert Whittaker, while he's incredible, and he's probably the most underrated UFC champion that we have at this point, he relies heavily on being the faster fighter. Because both of them came from a weight class down, they're slightly smaller than some of the other fighters that are up at 185, but they have a definitive speed advantage. Kelvin Gastelum's speed is unmatched. This is going to be the first time that we see Robert Whittaker not being the faster fighter. I fully expect Kelvin's hands to be just a hair quicker than Robert Whittaker's. Both of them have incredible boxing. Both of them have KO concussive power. Someone is going to sleep in this fight, and I think the line is off, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Whittaker has been through the meat grinder. He's fought some of the best guys that the UFC has to offer, especially those last two fights against Yoel Romero. He's taken massive amounts of damage. That kind of damage is career-adjusting damage. Some people never recover from that. On top of that, he only fought once in 2018. He fought Yoel in June of 2018, and it's taken him until now to recover and be healthy enough to defend his title. Kelvin Gastelum is a completely different animal from a guy like Yoel Romero. Yoel is massively explosive, has insane knockout power, but he's relatively slow in plotting the rest of the fight. He keeps you guessing. You have no idea when it's going to come, but eventually he explodes. And when he explodes, he caves in skulls. Kelvin, on the other hand, is a volume fighter. He's going to press his advantage. He's going to use footwork to angle you where he wants you, and then he's going to unload a barrage of punches, and his killer instinct is second to none. If he clips you, if he hurts you, you are not surviving that. The amount of volume that he can pour on you when you're already damaged is just next level. So Robert was able to take Yoel Romero's best punch, and that is a massive feat of its own. But if he gets clipped by Kelvin Gastelum, Kelvin will not let him have the time he needs to recover. I absolutely see Kelvin Gastelum winning this fight and winning it by KO. Robert is a minus 250 favorite. Kelvin, we're getting about plus 210 on him as an underdog, and this is my absolute favorite type of circumstance when it comes to MMA. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, underdogs in MMA come through at these big numbers all the time because you are locking two human beings inside of a steel cage. It's willpower. They're fighting for their families. They're fighting for themselves. They're fighting. When you're in there, it's war. It's kill or be killed. And you're telling me that this guy is a 2.5 to 1 favorite over the other guy? Not in this case. I mean, if you break down the stats, people want to take a real numbers-driven look at this kind of a thing. And sure, Robert seems like he is that kind of a favorite. But if you look at the intangibles, if you look at the kind of things that Kelvin brings to the table, he's got a lot better chance, in my opinion. And so we're going to rock Kelvin Gastelum. I think you could take either fighter really winning inside the distance because I don't see this fight going to the scorecards. But the fact that both these guys can wrestle, the fact that Robert has the type of ability to absorb damage that he does, I am just going to take Kelvin Gastelum straight. And we can get him at plus 210 still at 5 dimes. I think I'll take that. If you like him by KO, wouldn't fault you whatsoever. You can get plus 354 on Kelvin Gastelum to win by KO or TKO, and I think that's a fantastic bet, honestly. I might even end up on it myself, but for the official pick, we're just going to take him straight because plus 210 is a ton of value already. So let's rock Kelvin Gastelum and new UFC middleweight champion of the world, plus 210, and let's make some cash. So to recap, the plays that we're making for UFC 234 are Smith wins inside the distance, minus 131. Jim Croute straight, minus 127. Jim Croute inside the distance, plus 356. Woo! Ronnie Yahya by submission, plus 210. Israel Adesanya inside the distance, minus 132. And Kelvin Gastelum, plus 210. For those of you interested in a best bet, if you only had one bullet that you were going to fire at this thing, I would say Jim Croute inside the distance plus 356 holds the most value on the card. A close second would be Adesanya wins inside the distance, and then, maybe tied. You know what? Adesanya and Kelvin, I kind of flip-flop between those two because Silva, there's nothing saying that Silva is necessarily at the point where it's going to be easy to finish him inside the distance. And same thing, you're rolling the dice with Kelvin against a rightful champion. So Number 1 pick, Jim Croute, inside the distance. Tied for second, Adesanya inside the distance, or Kelvin Gastelum. Take your pick. Let's rock. Thank you all so much for joining me for the first ever episode of the Die Hard MMA Podcast. I'm your host, Clint McLean. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter, on Instagram. You can email me. You can reply to the podcast. Please subscribe. Please give us a nice 5-star rating so we get this thing rolling. Let's make some money together. Let's have some fun together. And let me know what you think of the show. Thank you all again. One more time. Let's roll.